The deed of trust instrument. The deed of trust is the instrument. Now, every once in a while, you've actually learned something that could serve you at another point as well. Do you recognize this whole thing about deeds? This whole thing about deeds. I want you to think back to the earlier chapter. When the seller conveys the property to the buyer, what type of deed is the seller most likely going to convey to the buyer? Say it again. General warranty deed. You remember that? From me, the seller, to you, the buyer. Boom. Now you own the property. Well, the deed of trust is a different document. This is when the buyer is giving the property up as collateral. Okay? So I need you to understand the significance of those two deeds. The general warranty deed from the seller to the buyer, the deed of trust from the borrower to the trustee. You okay on that? But at the end of the day, you know what they have in common? They're both what? Deeds. They're both deeds. Do you remember the essential elements of a valid deed? Now listen, I don't expect you to enumerate those for me because it's been a while since you talked about them. But I'm telling you, they're actually somewhat important. Let me remind you some of the essential elements of a valid deed. And then I'm going to ask you this question. Don't you think the essential elements of a valid deed are going to be the same essential elements as a deed of trust? Okay? They're worded differently here, but they don't have to be. Did a deed have to be in writing? Yes. Deed of trust has to be in writing as well. Does a deed have to have a valid legal description? Yeah, deed of trust has to have a valid legal description as well. Who has to sign the deed? The grantor. Guess who has to sign the deed of trust? The trustor has to sign the deed of trust. The borrower, right? Giving up their property as collateral. Let's see. It has to be delivered and accepted during life. Does all this sound familiar to you? See, here's actually the only thing that's different about the deed of trust from the deed. In a deed, we say that it has to have operative words of conveyance. The grantor in fee simple does grant, bargain, sell, and convey. The difference in a deed of trust is it has mortgaging language. Mortgaging language means I, the buyer, the trustor, am giving up this property as collateral for a debt. Meaning that once the debt is satisfied, what do I expect? The deed of trust is going to be canceled. I'll actually show you language later in the deed of trust, which basically says that once I pay off the debt, I don't expect this deed of trust to still be in existence. Okay? So what I'm telling you here, the deed of trust instrument, if you look at it closely enough and think about it, it's actually the same list as essential elements of a valid deed, with the exception of the operative words of conveyance are different. This one says I'm conveying it to you under the deed. The deed of trust says I'm conveying it only for the collateral for a debt. Make sense? Then let's not study this. We already know. In that deed of trust, it's also going to talk about rights of the parties. Does that make sense? It's going to tell the rights of the parties. Let's talk about the rights and the duties of the borrower. I bet you didn't have to stay up late at night to study this one. Borrower, you're going to have to pay a debt. All right? That's what the deed of trust is about. We expect you to repay your debt. If you don't repay this debt, you're going to be in what word starting with the letter D, Ann? Default. You're going to be in default. That's the word of today. The word of the day is default. Y'all can get that one right on the exam. Did you know this as well, that you also have to, I'm going to take these next two together just to save a little bit of time. Do you realize that your deed of trust says that you have to pay your real property taxes and your homeowner's insurance as well? Why would the bank care whether you pay your real property taxes and homeowner's insurance? The taxes could be a lien against the property, right? And the bank doesn't like to be behind anybody for very much. They already recognize that real property taxes come before them in priority, right? And if the bank says that, well, if the house burns down, we want to make sure that we get paid, that's why you have to carry insurance. Matter of fact, not only might the bank consider you in default, the bank may do worse than that. If you don't pay your insurance, you know what they might do? They might go buy it for you and then make you pay them. And they don't shop for insurance when they provide it for you. Your deed of trust said you would do all these things. I'm going to pay you, bank. I'm going to pay my taxes. I'm going to make sure that there's always insurance. As long as you have this collateral, I'm going to make sure that there's insurance on the property. And your deed of trust also says this. You will not allow your property to substantially deteriorate. I don't know if you realize it, but your deed of trust says, you know what, it's the bank's collateral. I'm going to take care of it, normal maintenance, okay? If you go down and start, if you're thinking about tearing your house down and rebuilding a new one, you might want to talk to your lender first to find out if they are content with that, okay? Failure in your duties obviously equals a default there. And then I'm going to talk to you more about the satisfaction of the mortgage a little bit later, because we have a specific clause that addresses your mortgage satisfaction. When you paid off the paid off the note, there's no reason for the bank to have a lien against your property, right? So duties of the borrower, every one of those makes sense, right? So that should make it easy to study. Continuing on, let's talk about the rights of the lender. Let's talk about the rights of the lender. Let's talk about actually from a level 1 vocabulary standpoint, just keep it nice and simple. The lender under the deed of trust has the right to assign the note. They have the right to assign the note. Now let's keep this simple. Do you remember me talking just briefly, and probably on Wednesday I will talk in more depth about this, but I talked just briefly about the idea of the secondary market. When I need to borrow money, I go to the primary market, right? I go to my lender and I borrow money. What those lenders do is they package these mortgages and they sell them in the secondary market, and that provides liquidity so that they can go make another loan, and this happens millions of times a day. Okay? The idea of assignment. A lender can assign his rights to someone else. Now think about that. If you've ever purchased a home and borrowed money to purchase your home, literally before I left the closing table, the bank had already sold my note to someone else. I didn't really care. I mean, they didn't change the terms. It was just a matter of where I'm going to mail the check. It's the same terms, it's the same everything else. It's just I'm mailing it to a different party. If it wasn't for the right to assign a note, then in fact there would be no secondary market. You wouldn't be able to do that. When a note is assignable, we refer to that note as being a negotiable note. If you'll write that down now, I'm not sure if it comes up in my slides later or not, so let's write it down now. Negotiable notes are assignable. Negotiable notes are assignable.
Is that only under a deed of trust, or can you do that under the
mortgage as well?
lien theory?
Yeah, it clearly happens. Really, the difference is going to be more of a semantic one for us, and just knowing these vocabulary words, but the theory is very, very similar. So they're negotiable if you can assign them. Obviously, if you can't assign them, they're not negotiable. I think of a credit union when I think of non-negotiable notes. Oftentimes, credit unions keep their notes in-house, and because of that, it's what I refer to as a portfolio loan. I don't know if that means anything or not. But in other words, they collect the interest. Remember, with a note, whoever holds the note at any given time is the one that's going to get the interest on the note, right? So when you wonder, well, why would someone buy a note? To get that interest. Okay? You'll see how powerful that is on Wednesday when we start talking about the math associated with this. Your mind will be boggled by how much interest you pay in the early years on these notes. Okay, so they can assign the debt if it's negotiable. They can proceed with a foreclosure if the borrower is in default. That makes sense. You probably already knew that before you came to class. That's the purpose of the deed of trust and the mortgage. Foreclosure methods. Let's go ahead and take them on now. Since they're on the slide here, let's go ahead and take them on now. We're now back to the differences between the deed of trust and the mortgage. I want you to have the deed of trust associated with non-judicial foreclosure. Non-judicial foreclosure. Deed of trust. Title theory states we do non-judicial foreclosures. Word association. Lien theory states they use a mortgage. They have judicial foreclosures. Lien theory, they use a mortgage. They have judicial foreclosures. Without getting into extraordinary depth on these, let me just touch on this briefly. In North Carolina, we foreclose under what is known as the power of sale clause. I will bring that back up in just a moment when I talk about clauses in the deed of trust, but we foreclose under the power of sale clause. Here's what the power of sale clause says. Hey trustee, if that guy doesn't pay me, what I'm going to do, what the lender is going to do is they're going to call the trustee and they're going to say, go do your job and sell the property on the courthouse steps. under the power of sale clause. The bank is going to give the trustee the power to sell the property. Now, the reason it's non-judicial is, here's what happens. The trustee goes and does an administrative procedure in front of the clerk of court. Not a judge, but in front of the clerk of court. You have actually probably all seen that administrative proceeding before. Have you ever walked into a courthouse before and you see on the bulletin board in the lobby where they have all these papers stuck on the board? Those are public notices. Among those public notices are foreclosure notices, right? Have you ever noticed in the newspaper, if any of you still read the newspaper any longer, that in the want ads, they will usually have a section where they will advertise foreclosures, okay? And then, what was the other? Oh, and then the posting of the notices on the house that's getting ready to be foreclosed upon. This is part of the administrative proceeding that the trustee is performing. And guess what? Most of the time, the person who's being foreclosed on is not going to be able to resolve their debt. And so the trustee ultimately takes them literally on the courthouse steps. If you will go to the courthouse in the spring on any given day, you'll probably see somebody standing there with a paper and people standing around them. They are probably having a foreclosure sale. If it's raining, they could actually go inside. But it literally is oftentimes held right on the courthouse steps. So that is the administrative procedure that we're talking about under the power of sale clause. In states that are lien theory states where they do mortgages, it's the functional equivalent of a civil suit. And what's one of the problems with trying to file a civil suit against someone? What's that?
Takes a while.
It takes a while. It could be expensive. There could be delays and things like that. It's subject to the movements of the court. So our process tends to be a little more efficient under the power of sale clause than a civil action under mortgage theory states. Okay? Yes?
This is kind of off topic a little bit, but since North Carolina is a title theory state and other states are lien theory, how many other states are title theory like we are?
I can't remember. There's a dozen or so.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we're not completely unique
Okay.
in this, but we're not the majority. All right, we will bring that up. What's the association I wanted you to make? The association I wanted you to make simply in that case was title theory, non-judicial, power of sale. Lien theory, mortgage, judicial foreclosure. Got it? That was the important one. Oh, there it is on the next slide as well. So you're in good shape on that. Now, we talked about the responsibilities of the borrower. Let's now talk about the rights of the borrower. Let me go ahead and foreshadow on this just a little bit. For you guys, what you're actually looking at is the timeline on this next one. I want you to be very aware of the timeline. All right, here's the deal, buyer, borrower. You're a buyer to an agent. You're a borrower to a lender, okay? So here's the deal. You're not making your payments. The bank is exercising their rights to foreclose on your property. This is not good. Having said that, in North Carolina, as in most other states, I think there's only 2 or 3 that do not allow this. But as in most states, the buyers are given what is known as the right or equity of redemption. And what I mean by that is the right of redemption and the equity of redemption are the same thing. So don't let that wording throw you. The right or equity of redemption. And here's what it means. Remember, timeline, okay? If the foreclosure sale occurs, if the buyer shows up at any time before the gavel goes down on the foreclosure sale, the buyer will have the right to redeem their property. Okay? Amanda, you're nodding yes, and you went to Harvard Law School. So explain this to us. Right up until the time that the gavel goes down on the foreclosure sale, now keep in mind, this buyer has not been making his payments, right? But until the gavel goes down, what can the buyer do?
Redeem his property.
He can show up with the money. He can buy his property. I say buy it. He's paying off the note, right? So he can redeem his property. Now, how likely do you think that, think about it. At the foreclosure sale, think about what he'd have to do in most cases to redeem his property. He'd have to show up with all the money, plus all the penalties, plus interest that has accrued since that period of time. And, the bank could theoretically say, well, if you just pay your late payments plus penalties and interest, we'll allow it. That's completely at the bank's discretion at that point. But here's the deal. The owner hasn't made their their last 6 payments. So what do you think the chances are that they're going to show up and redeem their property? It's not good. But the fact is, every borrower has that right. If you can show up before the gavel goes down on the foreclosure sale, you can redeem your property by simply paying what you owe plus penalty plus interest. It's yours. Okay? Now, I told you there was a timeline to be careful about here. Almost all states allow for the equity of redemption. However, North Carolina adds, by general statute, that's why it's called a statutory redemption period. In North Carolina, you also have the right 10 days, up to 10 days after the foreclosure sale, you have what's known as the statutory redemption period. Okay? So here's the deal. Melissa, you're an investor. The gavel just went down on the foreclosure sale. She won the deal at $180,000. But she can't close today. She must wait at least how many days do you think? 10 days. There is a 10-day upset bid period under statutory right of redemption. So in other words, the buyer now has not just till the gavel goes down, but an additional how many? 10 days right to show up with the money and redeem their equity in the property. Well, let's be real. How many of them do you think are really, if they could show up before the foreclosure sale, they're probably not going to come up during the 10-day upset bid period, are they? But they could. Maybe they have a crazy uncle that died and they got some money. I don't know. But if they can redeem their equity in the property. So far, so good. Statutory upset period has everything to do with the 10-day upset, okay? But you know what? There's actually something else good that could happen for that borrower during that time period. Melissa won. She won the foreclosure sale at $180,000. I'm an investor. I was out of town that day. I come back into downtown. I go to the clerk's office. I say, what did that property sell for? $180,000. Oh my gosh. I easily would have bid more than that. Guess what I could do during the upset bid period? I could upset the bid. Yes. So I can go in. Now I can't raise it by $1. I have to raise it by $750 or 5%, whichever is greater. Okay? But assuming that I do, now there's a new bid on the floor for $190,000, and now I'm the winning bid, right? However, I can't close for how many days do you think? 10, because it opens up a new 10-day upset bid period. And this could continue to go on. Now come on, let's be realistic about this. Usually by the time someone is foreclosed on, there's not a ton of equity in the property. So it's a little bit naive to think that there are going to be multiple upsets, but there could be. And you know what? If I were the borrower, even if I couldn't come and get my property back, I would love it if you guys kept upsetting the bid, making it higher and higher. As the borrower who's getting ready to lose his house, why do I care who gets the bid and how high it goes? It'll pay off your liens and probably minimize your what? Does anybody remember this word?
Your personal, like, civil lawsuits.
Okay, yeah, you're making stuff up. It's right. No word. It starts with the letter deficiency. It ends with the letter judgment. You would limit your deficiency judgments. Yeah, exactly what you're talking about. Those civil actions that could come after you. So even if I don't win it, there is a good thing that could happen to help me out. What do you think about this? At a foreclosure sale, and again, this is a long shot, but if a foreclosure sale, if all the liens are paid off, all the taxes, the penalty, the cost of the sale, and there's still money left over, do you know who gets that money? The borrower actually gets that money. Banks should not be financially incentivized to foreclose on. That's the logic behind this, okay? So what did we talk about and why is it important? Do you understand that the equity or right of redemption ends when they say sold at the foreclosure sale, right? But that opens up a new period of time called the statutory redemption period, which is 10 days. And that will go on until it goes 10 days without someone upsetting the bid. Make sense? Perfect. Perfect. What, Jim?
So it's different, is it different than an auction, or is it the same?
No, the foreclosure sale is an auction.
Okay.
And technically, the statutory bid period is kind of like a silent auction at that point, because we already know that somebody won it on the steps of the courthouse that day. And that will be the winning bid if nobody upsets it. But you can continue to come into the clerk's office.
So it's still the same with an auction, like when they say sold, that person is bound to it, but then somebody else can come in and upset it.
Yeah, it's a different set of rules, that's what I'm about. So yeah, it's, in some ways it's an absolute auction, but in some ways it's not, because it could be upset.
The price are usually low in the, that auction.
Well,
The price is
yeah, in
usually-
fact-
Why would you go there and buy that house?
Why would I go to the courthouse steps?
Yeah, no, and buy that house, so the price must be lower than the market.
So why would I buy it during the upset bid period?
Right.
Well, and think about this, somebody was telling me about an auction they went to one time, and only like 3 people showed up, okay? It's a bad weather day or whatever, so there weren't that many people there. Oftentimes what happens is the bank has a number that they need to get, and once they get that number, they'll sell it to whoever wins. But because there was so little competition that day, then what happened was, it made sense for him to come and check. Now, let's say that I'm sick and I can't be in an auction one day. Well, the fact of the matter is, if I want to go back by and see what it sold for, if I'm willing to make that much more investment in the property, I could get it. It's somewhat rare that upsets happen, but it's conceivable. It's conceivable.
What kind of means are they using to pay for the property? Are they assuming the same loan or
Oh,
are
no,
they
no.
paying cash?
Yeah, for the most part, you got to pay for this, yeah. So the easiest way is cash or to have your loan lined up. It's probably not going to be a traditional loan. It's probably going to be some other type of private equity or something like that. But yeah, I mean, you're buying for cash is the best way of looking at it.
Since it does say at the bottom there, borrower can still redeem property by paying full balance. Since obviously, like you said, it's in the newspaper, it's posted at the courthouse. If an investor, like you said, is sick one day and they saw that it went for 180, couldn't they knock on the door and be like, all right, you only owe 150, I'll give you 175 cash, and then you know, like gift of sale, give me the house.
Yeah.
And the borrower would be the ultimate one that paid it.
They could, and they could do that if there was a way to circumvent the sale. Now, keep in mind, the scenario that you just gave is a little bit rare, because if I thought it was going to sell at 180 at auction, I would have probably figured out a way to redeem that equity in between there. And so those situations are fairly rare. Usually by the time it goes to foreclosure, they probably owe more than what it's worth. That's the usual case. Hey, listen, it's not impossible what you said. I mean, who knows? It could be a situation where someone inherited a property and they just don't want it. They don't want to go through the exercise of paying for it and coming up with the money. So I could just go to an investor and say, hey, listen, you buy me out.
Yeah.
All bank cares about is getting the money. Who had their hand up? Yeah, John.
Is the first bullet point only exclusive to judicial foreclosure?
The right or equity of redemption? No, it works in all states. Same logic, all states. Yes, ma'am.
Is that against the law, what she said, like if an investor goes and
No.
literally manipulates from
No, because remember, until the foreclosure sale, who owns that property?
the borrower?
The borrower has equitable title in the property. So just like anything, you can sell it. So there's nothing illegal about doing that. In fairness, the bank really doesn't want your property. They just want their money. So they don't care how they get it. You want me to tell you what is illegal? And they busted this, oh gosh, it's been a couple of years ago at this point. There was apparently a ring of people that they kept seeing the same faces at the foreclosure sale. So eventually they got together and they basically said, well, here's the deal. It's the same ones of us that's buying the property every time. So I will agree not to bid on this property if you agree not to bid on this property. Do you know what they were doing? Basically what it's called? It's basically a type of price fixing is what it was doing. And it's fraudulent. Those guys got busted for that because they were agreeing not to bid in certain cases. There's that deficiency judgment that I was talking about. So you're probably thinking if I just advance it one more slide, you would have gotten to work. But yeah, clearly the deficiency judgment, if everybody's not paid at the foreclosure sale, then you can go after them personally. I want you to look at the last bullet point on this slide. And this is another one of those things that, listen, if you're really good at memorizing stuff, just memorize it. But if you're not good at memorizing, see if this logic makes sense. We're talking about foreclosure sales, right? Normally held by banks. we have not talked a lot about seller financing in this class yet. We did talk about the contract for deed. A little bit later in this chapter, we'll talk about something called a purchase money mortgage, which is a type of seller financing. But tell me why this makes sense. If you are seller financing a property, a mortgage, so to speak, and you don't get paid, can you foreclose on that property? If you're seller financing, can you foreclose on the property? Sure you can. Sure you can. But what you cannot do is go for a deficiency judgment. So in other words, if I foreclose on my buyer, what's my best case scenario in this particular case? I get what back? I get the property back. Okay? In other words, I don't get the property back and say, I'm going to hound you for the rest of your life for the $20,000 that you were upside down. It's one of the risks of doing seller financing, but actually there's a logic behind it as well. What's the difference between a bank and me as an individual as far as the law goes? Banks are heavily regulated. You know, individuals are not heavily regulated. So here's the deal. Erica, if you want to do seller financing, go ahead and knock yourself out. But if you foreclose on this guy, you can either get the money or the property, but you can't get the property and then charge him more because he was behind in his payments. Okay? No deficiency judgments on seller financing. Okay, short sale. Wow, this is a long conversation. And it's probably a new outline heading. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about this now. It seems like as good a time as any to get this in our notes. Short sale. I teach a class and it talks about the most common complaints to the Real Estate Commission. They usually do this list about every 10 years or so. The most common complaints that people call the commission and complain about agents about. 10 years ago, when they did this list, the word short sale was nowhere on the list. When I did this class about 5 years ago, short sales were like number 5 on the list, okay? So, 10, 20 years ago, nobody complained about short sales. As a matter of fact, until 10 years ago, I had never even heard the word short sale used in regards to real estate. But then we had the meltdown of 2008, right? And so a lot of things changed. Now, not only are we starting to have short sales, which people didn't understand to start with, we also have agents who are starting to do things that are a little bit above your education, okay? So let's talk about, first of all, what a short sale is. I would like for you to have a good definition of a short sale. And I think that there are 3 or 4 components, depending on how you write these down. But let's start with number 1. A short sale is the sale of a property. It's a sale where the proceeds will not be sufficient to cover the outstanding liens. A short sale is a sale of a property where the proceeds will not be sufficient to cover the outstanding liens. Got it, or you needed to get there? The proceeds, what you take in, will not be sufficient to cover the outstanding liens. You can't pay off, you're not going to get enough to pay off your mortgages. Have you ever heard someone say that they were underwater or upside down? That's what we're talking about. You owe more than you could possibly sell the property for, right? Now, don't write this down, but relate it back to something we talked about in chapter 4. Think about what a lien is. A lien is the lien holder's right to kind of hold you hostage on that property until they get their money. So if you can't clear the liens, they're not going to release them, so you can't convey clear title. So in a short sale, you're not going to make enough money to cover all of your liens, right? Number 2, the borrower does not have sufficient other assets. The borrower does not have sufficient other assets to cover the shortage. The borrower does not have sufficient other assets to cover the shortage. Back in 2009, I was teaching a class, and this came up. At the time we were teaching in 2009, this was fairly novel. I mean, this was still pretty new. And you'd hear stories like this, horror stories about buyers going under contract on a house, finding out it was a short sale, and sometimes it would take 9 months, 12 months, 14 months to close. These things were really a pain for everybody. And so after talking about this and commiserating with all of the students in the class, obviously it was a post-license class, that's why we were talking about it. I had this one guy, and apparently he knew more than the rest of us, so he was going to tell us, he's like, I don't know why you guys are having such a problem with short sales. I just did one and completed it in 40 days. Like, okay, well that's interesting. That's interesting, because nobody was doing that at that time. There are some programs now where you could possibly do it, but at that time that was unheard of. So we're like, okay, tell me, what do you know that none of the rest of us know that's going to allow you to do a short sale in 40 days? So he starts describing the situation. What he described was, number one, this seller is about $25,000 upside down, blah, blah, blah. Like, all right. He said, and what I had him do was go to another one of his properties, borrow against that property to pay off this property. I said, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. He was upside down, but this is not a short sale, because look at number two. Didn't he have sufficient other assets that he could reach into to pay this? I've got a secret for you. If the lien holders get paid off, they can't stop you from conveying the property. What he did took no genius at all. It was not a short sale. Okay? Interesting, but not a short sale. Number three. Make sure I use my wording correct here. The lender opts, O-P-T-S. The lender opts to take less than they are owed and release the lien. The lender opts to take less than they are owed and release the lien. Can you put 1, 2, and 3 together there? Okay. You're upside down. You don't have other assets. You want to sell your property. All right? Well, obviously, the lender wants to get paid off. Why would a lender, a lien holder, why would a lien holder ever take less than what they were owed? Why do you think that's the case? Now, I'm going to make you answer this one. I'm not going to stand in. Why would a bank ever take less than what they're owed? It might be the same again. It might be the best they can get. It might be the best they can get. What good is it going to do to hold them hostage? I want you to think about 2009. Property values were plummeting in 2009. If I were a lender and I look at what's going on and I find out you have somebody on the table who's willing to pay something, I would highly consider taking that, because another month from now that house would be worth $3,000 less. And how well do you think somebody's taking care of it when they're in a short sale situation? They don't have money to pay their mortgage. They're certainly not going to spend money fixing the house, right? And so a lender made a decision. That's the best that we can do. Let's take that and let's cut our losses. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons that short sales ended up being so long in the early years, it was hard finding someone at the bank to make the decision. That's the best we're going to do. Even though you could look at the numbers, you could tell they need to take it, they need to take it, they need to take it. Think about being the one at the bank that has to say, we're getting ready to, throw some money out the window and take this, because it's the best that we can get. That's why they did it.